seminar program at Indiana University Southeast.
So today, thank you. You've all joined us because, as I'm sure you're feeling, as we are feeling, we are ever increasingly being asked to prove that students are learning what we say that they are learning. We have to demonstrate direct evidence of student learning, and we're being asked to do so with less money and less staff. So one of the things that Sam and I set out to do with the first year seminar program was figure out how can we collect that evidence that we need, whether it's for internal stakeholders, external accreditors, whomever may need to see this. How can we collect this in such a way that we aren't asking faculty to do something extra, but we're also not asking our burdened staff of IDs, here, you do a bunch of extra work too. So the way that we sort of came up with a solution to this was to leverage a tool that we already have. So again, thinking about budgets, we didn't have to go to IU and say, hey, we need some money to buy this other program so that we can collect this evidence. We decided just to leverage a tool that we already had that's certainly coming out of the pandemic. Our faculty should be intimately, maybe more than they ever wish to be, acquainted with our Canvas LMS. So we found a way that we can use the Canvas outcomes tool to collect that data in real time along the way so that it doesn't become this huge thing either at the end of a semester or at the end of an academic year when reporting is due, that you're scrambling to figure out where can we find this data that they want? How can we package it and present it in a way that's usable and actionable? And how can we do that without asking people to spend a bunch of extra time doing it? So if you're sitting in this room and you are not at a Canvas school, fear not, there are comparable tools in the other mainly used LMSs as well. Moodle, Blackboard, and D2L Brightspace all have an equivalent tool. Maybe the functionality is a little bit different. Sometimes they call it something else like goals. But all of these are hyperlinks. We have shared our presentation, so you can go to those and research kind of what this tool looks like for your LMS if you're not at a Canvas school. But our presentation will be from the point of view of the Canvas user. So ultimately, it wouldn't be a QM conference if we didn't talk about our outcomes, right? Why are we here today? What do we hope that you can do when you leave here? So today during this session, we're going to strategize aligning programmatic outcomes. Collecting the data only works if we have solid objectives or outcomes to start with, right? I know I'm in a room amongst my people. So, and for those that are joining us online, I'm preaching to the choir here. I don't have to convince you that alignment and objectives are important. We're also going to describe how to use the LMS tools to assess programmatic outcomes in real time. Like I said, not going to be something you have to do after the fact. We're just going to do it as we're teaching and as the students are learning. And then finally, we're going to list ways, because as we know, if we can't get people to do this, if we can't convince people that this is a usable, doable thing, then it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter that it's there, because people aren't going to use it if they don't see why it's valuable or how it's going to help them. So we're going to talk about some ways that we can kind of get some buy-in from both our faculty and the administrators.
So where are you all on your journey? Are you at what's an outcome? You probably are with some of your faculty. You don't have to admit it though. Or are you already fully on your assessment journey, and instead of you not being at what's an outcome, but are you at a place where, how do I better use the feedback loop? How do I better present the data? So this is presentation outcome number 1. Okay, so the screenshot up there is from Canvas. Other LMSs look different, obviously. One caveat about this: your Canvas administrators at your campus have to opt into this outcomes tool. So it's part of the package. It's not always turned on. So you'd have to ask your Canvas administrators to turn this on. Sorry. Depending on your program that you're thinking about doing this with, they can use shared rubrics or shared assignments. Either way, the rubrics get shared, even if they share the assignments. Or maybe you're someplace that has a standardized curriculum. This is even better for you all then. And this kind of pertains to the question that got asked at breakfast this morning. How do we ensure that students are getting the same experience or learning the same stuff in 2 different, I think it was epidemiology was the example at breakfast this morning. How do we know they're doing this if the instructors are teaching it in the same way? this is one of the ways you can do it with a shared assessment rubric. That will help. And so if you look up here, how do you attach an assessment rubric to a regular grading rubric? It's the little magnifying glass, find the outcome. So why use outcomes for program assessment? Well, you can pull data from multiple modalities. So if you are in charge of a program like I am, where we have face-to-face courses, hybrid courses, and 100% online courses that are distance directed. So that means there are some synchronous meetings, or if you're 100% online asynchronous, you can still pull data from across all those multiple modalities. There is an easy way if associate faculty work in your program, they just upload or import the rubrics and they use it that way. You don't have to try and get your associate faculty to do the assessment at the end of the semester. And you can pull the report and manipulate the data a bit and share it with the instructors almost instantaneously at the end of the semester. All right, so if everybody would get your cell phones out, we're going to do a poll everywhere, poll anywhere.
Pull everywhere.
Poll everywhere. And follow the directions on the screen. You text in 37.
Yeah, the text. So you enter 37607. This is for our online folks too. Pull out your cell phone, send a text message as though 37607 is the phone number you are texting. The text should say Karri Hamlett-Bedan 169. I am very sorry for my lengthy name. I wish that it were shorter on days like this. But if you text that, it's going to invite you to join our poll. And you should see a question that matches the one that you see on our slide here pop up.
And everybody in Zoom should be seeing the same question. So it's text in A, B, C, D, or E. I'm not sure there's an other please list. However, there will be an opportunity to share. So if you use other, you can share that. Everybody find it? Anybody having technical difficulties? Yay, gotta love it when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we already have some data coming in. This is very exciting. Ooh, as of right now, I'll call it as it comes in. We started out with Gen Ed being the number one, but now we're seeing a pretty good distribution. It's moving all over the place. We'll take just a few more seconds, make sure we give the folks online some time to respond as well.
Okay, so for those of you out in our audience, turn around and chat with your neighbor and tell them what your answer was and why. And for those of you that are on Zoom, you can use either Q&A or chat. Talk to each other. What choice did you make and why do you think it would work well at your university? And we're only going to give you a couple minutes, so go.
Not working on it.
But Gen Ed is a great tool for Gen Ed, I think. I wish we'd go to it too. Could I ask somebody to shout out? Or should we just move on?
Tell me you have 30 seconds to wrap it up.
All right, about 30 seconds to wrap your thoughts up. You can tell them what the most popular answer is, and then we can see if anybody, did anybody choose Gen Ed? What did you all say? All right, cool. So Karri's going to let you know what the most popular answers were.
Yes, so far and away, we have two front runners here, and it's pretty evenly split between these two. So 35% of you said that a major or collaborative program is where you see this being most useful, and 40% said gen ed. So that's kind of where we lie. We had some others in the other categories as well. I'd love to know what the others are. So if you're online, please feel free to drop what your other was in the chat or the Q&A. We'll have Q&A at the end of the session as well. So those of you in the room will be able to tell us about that other for you. But definitely it seems like major collaborative programs in gen ed are where you can see this being most effective or useful. All right, so now I get the joy as a Canvas administrator for my campus. I spent a lot of time kind of being in Canvas and figuring out the inner workings of it. So we had to figure out how can we use the outcomes, like what's required from an administrative or support perspective to make this happen on our campus. So here's, we've said some of these, but a lot of the reasons that we're using this is because it allows us to collect that direct evidence of student learning. It's painful sometimes at the end of the year when you're trying to put those reports together and you're thinking like, if you're faculty or if you're supporting faculty who are putting those together, what is my actual evidence? So we're telling you that this can be used for that evidence. Again, as Sam mentioned, it can be in the form of shared assignments or shared rubrics. It could be both. And I'll even offer on a future slide, sometimes it's neither. So it's a little bit, I think in this way, it makes this tool more of a one size fits all, because there's not one way that you have to do this. You can really slice and dice this and leverage it in such a way that it's going to work for you no matter what's happening. You get that feedback loop going. So I'll share an anecdote here. I was working with our School of Education, and they had in a master's program, they had a key assessment that one of the criterion on it was that students were able to cite in APA format. They were able to cite their references. Well, because it was a master's program, in their instruction, they never actually addressed how to cite anything in APA format. They assumed that students that by the time they got to a master's program, that they didn't need to cover that again, because they surely in the 4 years they'd completed their undergrad somewhere and someone had taught them how to do that. Well, when we ran our reports and we look at it, there's this glaring hole in that outcome that was associated with APA formatting. And it was so funny because we were looking at this spreadsheet for less than 5 minutes. And the program coordinator sitting next to me says, we don't cover that. We don't cover that. And so it was this like light bulb moment where the data is like shining a light on this thing. We need to tailor the instruction to be sure that that's a thing that we're talking about. So that's another way that you can use this. That feedback loop was instantaneous in that case. The second we ran the report, it was like, oh, here's something that we can fix and fix pretty easily. And then lastly, just offer some transparency. So when the accrediting bodies come in, we don't have to explain to them our way of doing it, and our way being a way that maybe is not the clearest. We all have to navigate our own landscapes, but in this way, we have this like concrete, tangible thing that we can share that just allows us to really shine a light on how we're doing assessment. So for this one, how do you get started? What do you do with it? So in this case, I've got some examples here of these are actual programmatic outcomes that are being used by a program on this campus. In this case, as Sam said, our first year seminar program, which for those of you who may not call it that on your campus, it's basically like an orientation to college course, right? This is for students that are coming in, whether they're brand new students, they've never gone to college before, or they're transferring and they have under 30 credits. These are the first year seminar students that we're just sort of onboarding them to college and how to be a student. So here's their outcomes. Well, what you need is you need a person that has Canvas administrator access. And I expect sitting in a room full of what I know has many IDs in it, many of you are probably that person for your campus. So you want to go in at the account level, you go into your admin. In this case, the way that we have, so this is FE indicates this is for our Southeast campus. And this may be structured differently at the school that you're at, but for us, each of our campuses, that we have 7 within the IU system, we start it with the acronym that's used for that campus. And then we've got this, I'll use the term bucket, the nodes in Canvas. This is our colleges of arts and sciences, so COAS. And so what that means is that because we're building them at this place in Canvas, and this is something that you want to think about as you're thinking about how you might incorporate this on your campus, where does it make sense for these outcomes to live? You need to put them at a high enough level that they can be accessed by the folks who need them, but you don't want to put them so high that people who really have no business being in those outcomes are able to see them or import them into their own classes. Because inevitably, if you do that, not to imply that anyone would do anything unsavory with it, but it could skew your data. If you have someone that's pulled an outcome in because maybe they see that there are gen ed outcomes up there and they think, oh, I'd like to know how my class incorporates this gen ed outcome, but I'm not actually part of gen ed. So this is like an elective that I'm teaching or something. You wouldn't want them to pull that into their course because then it could, corrupt the data that you're collecting. So have this person that's a Canvas admin go in. It's a folder structure. So you can do that by hitting the plus group button here in Canvas. In this case, we're labeling them. Your naming device is very important. Make sure that you're thoughtful about what you're naming them. Make sure that it makes sense for you. Make sure that it also makes sense to your constituents. They need to understand where they're looking for something when they go looking for it. So in this case, this is our first year seminar assessment, and then all of the outcomes are here. So what makes these different and how they're labeled differently than a standard rubric criterion is that you'll see this bullseye target. So that indicates that that is collecting outcomes data. It's not just grading an assignment. So once those are built, they will be accessible to anyone whose class within Canvas falls in this node. Oh, wait, just a second. I have a pro tip for that one. That's okay. I was going to play our nice little chime.
Here.
Maybe I'm not sharing my computer sound. Well, that's okay.
I guess you're not.
There was going to be a really fun sound. I'm sorry. That we're not sharing. You got to love it. The tech when it doesn't do what you want.
But that's all right. There's a really nice light bulb icon.
Yes. Yeah. So the point of that is that for each of these slides where you see that icon, we're going to share a pro tip with you. So this is something that we learned through the School of Hard Knocks sometimes of just doing the wrong thing. And then you figure it out after the point. And you wish, gosh, I wish I knew someone that would have told me this before I got started. So for this one, my pro tip to you is don't have too many cooks in the kitchen. Try to find a person that is the person that does this. Maybe two people, because I could get hit by a bus tomorrow and I don't want to be the only one who knows how to click the buttons and make the thing happen. But don't have too many folks in here, because the more people that are able to access and build this at the account level, the more chance there is for inconsistencies across the way.
So you have to deal with your groups first and then.
Now, what's interesting, you don't have to. Like you could skip this altogether and just start building outcomes. But what happens is if you're building them, because you're building them at such a high level, this gets really unruly really fast. So I always build a group first. And sometimes like I'll share an example. When I was working with the School of Education, and I'll just be really transparent here, we were trying to shift away from paying for a third-party product. The School of Ed had been paying out of its own budget for this third-party product to do their assessment data collection. And we didn't want to spend that money anymore. So we thought, how can we leverage this thing that we already have, and how can we collect this data? And so for their bucket, it's FEDUC, and it's the entire School of Ed and every program that resides within it. So as you can imagine, that can get really big and really unruly really fast. Yeah.
I would say the other part tip is to actually give little labels to each of your outcomes, because you talked about education. They have CAPE, they have ILL, they have all these.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so for those of you who are joining us online, the pro tip was that if you are working with a large, like an entire school that's going to take this on, anyone who's worked with the School of Ed on your campus knows they don't just have to please one party, right? They have to align to state standards. They have to align to programmatic standards. So they may be aligning to like CAPE standards or, whatever it may be. And so that needs to be included. Now, this happens to be a really clean, it's one course, one program or one course program. So this can be really simplistic. But as you get into more complex use cases, definitely you might want to lead with what is the CAPE standard that is aligned to that, and make that part of how you actually name the outcome in Canvas. Because as I'll show you later, when you run your reporting, where you're going to be glad you did that, right? Because it's really hard to sort and filter when you don't have that built in. But yeah, so like with the School of Ed, I would have a parent folder called, SOE outcomes. And then even within that, I would have a subfolder for every single program. So you want to be really thoughtful, because once they're built, you can move things, but that's very cumbersome. So you really want to try to build it right the first time. So do a lot of pre-planning, even if you have to draw out a map to think about where these things need to live in terms of the folder structure. Do that. And then of course, figuring out how you're gonna, if you need to indicate that this outcome is aligned also to a state standard, you might want to work that into that too. Thank you. So you've got them built. Now what? What do you do with them? They live in Canvas, but how are they usable? So you've got a couple of different ways that you can do that. You can pull it into a rubric, or you can actually create a programmatic rubric where someone could just import an entire rubric. But before I get there, I want to kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of how that comes together. So when I build that, I've got some choices to make. One of those choices is, what do I want to call my rating scale? That is an editable field in Canvas. So you're not married to exceeds, expectations, meets, whatever the defaults are. You can change those to whatever makes sense for your program. The other thing too is you have control over what the point value for those rating scales are. So I'll skip ahead to my pro tip and then come back. My pro tip for this one is get with your Office of Institutional Effectiveness or Institutional Research or whomever is going to be doing the assessment data reporting on the back end. Ask them what scale they're using, because that's double the math that you have to do. If you're collecting it on a 3, 2, 1, 0 scale, but you find out that when it goes to them, they're using a 5-point scale, suddenly you've got to figure out how does a 3 equate to a 5 and so on. So save yourself some work and try, if you have the luxury to do so and the program is on board with that, try to build this in such a way that it matches whatever they're going to be doing. You can set it to what is mastery. So in this case, we're saying if the student meets the objective, that's mastery. If they get a 3, great, but not required. And the calculation method here, we've chosen for this program to use highest score. That may not make the most sense for your program. Definitely there are use cases for others. But for us, as long as the student can show that they've met that objective at least once, that's the one that we want to capture, right? Like it's first year seminar. If they can do it once, great, we're thrilled. But for other programs, you could set that to decaying average. If you want it to get less valuable over time, you could do it to most recent score. So you've got some flexibility there in terms of how you choose to calculate what the score is. So with this being set to highest score, you know, if a student, for example, gets a 1, a 4, a 2, and a 3, because they have 4 chances to demonstrate. That's the other thing, right? We don't want to just give them one chance to demonstrate mastery. Ideally, you have multiple opportunities. But because of that, they're going to have a varying score. The score that gets calculated for our reporting is just that 4. Moving on. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, go back. I forgot one thing. This one, this is so important and maybe a pro tip too. Make sure that one of your options is no submission or not attempted, because that does not mean the same thing as the student tried it and wasn't able to meet the objective, right? That's actually 2 different data points. Like we want to know how many students didn't even try, they didn't even turn in the assignment that was on it, and how many students tried it but were unable to meet the objective. So definitely I would share that, because I'll just confess, some of the earlier ones I built, I did not factor that in. And we had these 2 sort of lumped together. And then when you get into your reporting, it was like, oh, actually, those are 2 very different things. And I need to be able to demonstrate the 2 of them. Thank you. You're welcome. So then finally, you can attach them to a rubric or an assignment. If you have a programmatic rubric, meaning that everybody within the program is using the exact same rubric, you can attach these, create that rubric. Again, you need your Canvas administrator to do this for you. But when they create that programmatic rubric, your instructors are just going to import the rubric in as is, and it's already going to have all the criteria on it. In this case, we've got generally a regular rubric that was probably already being used. And you can see here, we've got point values on these. So that criterion is worth 12, that one's worth 12, that one's worth 6. But when I get down here to see the bullseye icon, that's how I know that that's my outcome. There's 2 dashes over here. So when I pulled this outcome into this existing rubric, there's a box that is checked by default, but you might want to uncheck it. It says use this criterion for grading. And if you don't want those points, and if anyone is out there in the world that like has a bug in Canvas's ear, please tell them to get rid of calling these points. They're not points. At least they don't have to be, right? It's a rating scale. It's a 3, 2, 1. That's just a rating, but these points don't mean the same thing as these points. And I think that can be really confusing. It can be confusing for faculty. It can be confusing for students, frankly. So it would be lovely if we could get rid of the PTS on there. But because they're there, you know, if anyone has questions, if your faculty have questions, if students have questions, just tell them, you know, direct them to this total points column over here. The assignment's still worth 50 points. That extra thing that's on there, it's collecting data. It's not counting for points. So when I said earlier that you can do a shared rubric, you can do a shared assignment, you could do both, or you could do neither. This would be an example of the neither. If you have faculty who are like, I don't want anybody telling me what assignment I have to use or what rubric I have to use to grade it, they can keep exactly what they have. They just have to go, when they edit their rubric, they click the little pencil icon. Rather than doing plus new criterion, you just do find outcome, and then they can import the individual outcome into their rubric. So that requires some trust that you're entrusting them to pull it in correctly. I would advise working closely with faculty who are going to do it in that way, just to be sure that it gets pulled in correctly, and so that you can be sure you are capturing that data. The other thing about this, and my pro tip for this, is that you don't want, let me think about how I want to phrase this. When you're going to be pulling this in, oh, I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'll
We'll
come
go on
back
to
to
the
it.
next one.
All right. So what's cool about this is that, yes, someone can run programmatic data, right? Someone can
Hey,
be running.
Karri,
Yeah.
I think what you were gonna say is remember to check the box.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Uncheck the box.
Uncheck the box.
Uncheck the box, but also Allison also works at IU. Thank you, Allison. So the other thing is that you want to make sure that you check the box that says that they are using SpeedGrader, because that's where the data is being entered. And you want to make sure that the box is checked that says use this rubric for grading.
Yeah.
Because if they don't have that box checked, they don't ever get to input the data, right? And that's happened. I've met with faculty after the semester is over. We run the reports and they say, why isn't my class showing up in your reporting? I don't understand. I had the assignment in my class. I had the rubric in my class. The students completed it. I gave them a grade. Why does the data not show up? And it's because they didn't use SpeedGrader and they didn't use the rubric for grading and actually click on each criterion to give that value. So definitely that's a super important thing. Yeah, you got a question?
More of a just an observation as we set these up for our campus program outcomes, and it's our first iteration. We're nowhere near expert level at this. What we had our faculty do was they went to their outcomes tool within their course and they pulled down and just associated with the course first of all, so that they knew they had them contained within their course and then they could use them really simply with this tool. So they didn't have to find at the upper level. They could find it just right within their own pool of things.
Yes. Yeah. And that's, that's a one-time, so many faculty, I feel like we sort of, I do the Ron Popeil set it and forget it. You create a shell and then as the live term runs, you just import it, right? Over term. And the nice thing about that is once you set these up once, you associate them with that class. When you do the import, it brings it with it. So this is like, yes, it is a little bit of extra work the first time because you have to associate those outcomes with that class. But once you do it once, if you're just importing, they come over every time. So it's a little bit of work on the front end, but it pays off in dividends definitely as you go through.
So, and if I could just offer an anecdote too, some of the faculty in my program, the first year seminar program, they didn't even know that SpeedGrader existed. So use it as an opportunity.
Yeah, once you go SpeedGrader, you never ever want to go back and you wondered how you lived without it. At least that's how I feel about it. So what's cool about this is that instructors can run reports for their own section. So I think one thing that you'll have to kind of talk to folks about is that yes, someone in an administrative position is going to be running reports on this entire program. But you have access to that data too, and you can run it on your own course. So that's done by going to your course settings and turning on the Learning Mastery Gradebook. So that's what the screenshot is here. We've turned on the Learning Mastery Gradebook up here. So we have a list of students. Up here, we've got each of our different outcomes, and you can drag and make those bigger if you want to see the whole thing. But just at a quick glance, you can see what are the assignments that students had trouble with. Is there a student who seems to be consistently having trouble meeting these outcomes? So really quickly within a snapshot, you can see that. This also gives you the ability to compare how are students in my class or my section comparing to students overall in the program. So when your program coordinators share out this overall data of like, as a program, here's where we're hitting benchmarks. You can compare, apples to apples and say, how are students in my class doing? And where do I fall kind of within the spectrum? So it's super easy. You just click the export report button. You get a nice little CSV file. So if you open it in Excel, you can see You export this data so you can use that for your own annual reporting, promotion and tenure, anything that you need that you want to share that data. Yeah.
So where's the mic? Hold on a second. He's going to bring you the mic. That's so that the Zoom people can hear.
Okay, so I do this in my courses, but something just occurred to me as you were talking. If I make a rubric with all my outcomes in it, and I want to attach that to like a quiz, right? Because you can add a rubric to that. If I don't want to measure every outcome for that assignment, and I just want to measure the two that it's measuring, do the others score as what happens to that? Like, does it just take what you are measuring and then add that to the Learning Mastery Gradebook? Or does it look at all of the outcomes that I have in that rubric? Does that make sense?
It does. Yep. So I think there's a couple different ways you could slice that. One is if you pull all of them in and then you just don't respond to them, it's just not going to collect any data on those.
Okay.
So it's not going to be reflected as though like students didn't meet it on that one. It's just not going to be collecting data.
Okay.
The other way you could do it is that if you wanted on your rubric for that quiz, only pull in the outcomes that are meaningful for that quiz. You can just omit them altogether.
But then I have to make another rubric, right? I would have to make a rubric.
So you have like a quiz rubric.
Right.
Sorry, for those who are in Zoom, we're discussing like if you're using the same rubric, like you want to be able to use it for multiple things across the course. So if you have like a quiz rubric and it just contains all of them, yes, the way that you're doing it makes total sense. Pull in one rubric, just ignore the ones that aren't applicable and it won't be collecting any data. I see another hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, this is just more of a comment. We just started this process, but we approached it differently in that we started setting up outcomes tied to quizzes instead of rubrics. So rubrics is our phase 2. We created, for any of you who are looking at standards-based grading, we created word banks for each standard in our curriculum frameworks. I worked in K-12, worked in higher ed for 13 years. So very familiar with CAPE and accreditation. So got that down too. But I just wanted everyone to know there is a way to tie all of this to your test banks as well. So you can run these outcomes reports based on quiz data as well as rubric data. And that's really powerful because we use TaskStream, TK20. Yeah, that's classic quizzes. Yes. Big difference. Well, I hope they do. There's a lot of things they don't have yet, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the folks who are in Zoom, we're discussing between Canvas classic quizzes and Canvas new quizzes and how the outcomes connection operates differently in those two spaces. They certainly do. I think there are pros and cons to both. I think, in classic quizzes, it's nice because you just attach it to the whole quiz. In new quizzes, currently, you're able to attach it to an individual quiz question, but the reporting is not quite there yet. So, yeah.
Is that me? Okay, quick question. So after it's set up and you go in to edit an objective or something like that, how does that work? Does that require rebuilding, or I guess just how does that work?
Yeah, my advice in that case would be if you need whatever you build them as, that one needs to stay that way forever. And if you need to make an edit, I would recommend just creating a new outcome and using that one instead. And the reason for that is that if you edit it, suddenly you no longer have apples to apples comparison, right? You've got apples and oranges, because if you're looking at historical data, like I know a lot of the programs that we work with, they may need to look at 3 years worth of data, and it needs to be able to be all correlated. And so if we make a change to that, it could potentially impact that in a negative way when they're trying to look at the historical data. Thank you. Yeah. All right. So this is scary, right? I'm going to self-proclaim I am not an Excel person. Excel is not my forte. It's not part of my, even though my resume, I'm sure, says that I'm proficient in the Microsoft Office suite, because we all say that, right? But Excel is really not my thing. So when it spits out the report, the admin, and again, use this as a talk point for your faculty. Other faculty can't go in and run reports on your course. Okay, this is going to be protected. No one other than the admin in that position that can run this report is going to be looking at how your class specifically performed, other than you. So it's going to spit out this big CSV file. But the nice thing about that is that it really is in this easy to use Excel format. So you can manipulate it. You could potentially maybe even move it into something like TaskStream or ExamSoft or whatever you might be using for assessment data. But you can pull this out in this sort of Excel. We're all, even if we're not experts, we're at least a little familiar with it. So you can do like a general kind of sort, filter, and average to turn this into something that's usable rather than this massive wall of spreadsheet.
Good.
I'm good.
All right. And so I'm one of those that like Excel is not my friend. I hate the little bitty boxes and I don't know how to program the program the formulas. But this is an example of the report that I did based on the way that I manipulated the Excel spreadsheet that came back from my data pool. And I'm a faculty person and I'm old. So if I can do it, everybody can do it, right? So you can do a sort, you can figure out the outcomes, you can do an average, and you can figure out how the program has done based on this. And because I'm an artist, I had to add the color in. So let's see. And then the other thing that is sort of my pro tip here is remember the 0 for not attempted. And also my other pro tip is the lady that runs our Office of Institutional Research, she loved the CSV file because she can do pivot tables and whatevers. And I'm like, have at it. So there's my pro tip. Here's another poll. So everybody get your phones out. Again, 37607, Karri Hamlett-Bedan 169. And here is your question. Your program, shared assignments, shared rubrics, both, still working on outcomes, didn't even know this existed. And some of you might already be pros at it. We should have put a pro one in too.
Yeah. Next time.
So we'll give you about 30 seconds. Karri's gonna monitor the responses and we'll let you know what the popular answer was.
Oh, so far these responses are very exciting. It's exciting to me because many of you are telling me that you didn't know this was a thing. And I'm so glad you're here today. And I'm so glad that we're talking about it.
And for those of you out in Zoom land who are faculty, you can get this. It's really, really easy once you get the hang of it. So,
If you can build a Canvas rubric, you can do this.
yep.
All right. Like our responses have largely stopped rolling in. I'm going to deactivate the poll. So it looks like far and away, many of you are still trying to get your programs just to agree on what the outcomes are, right? And that is fair. And absolutely, we empathize and know what that feels like. Another large swath of you, so it's about a third of you were saying you're not quite there yet, or you didn't know this was a thing. About another third of you were saying that you're still trying to just get on the same page with all the outcomes. And then it's kind of evenly spread on the others between shared assignment, shared rubrics, and both.
And so that'll be a question, once you get the outcomes together, that'll be a question to bring to your constituents. We can do it this way, we can do it this way, we can do it this way. What do y'all think? So,
yeah, meet them where they are and do it in the way that they want to do it, because that's how you get your buy-in, right?
yep, exactly. All right, the ultimate question. All right, and we should have added to this as well, not only faculty buy-in, but administrator buy-in. All right, so here are the selling points for you all. You have to set it, you only set it up once, right? Faculty could decide if you give them the option to do this. Is it common assignments? Is it common rubrics, right? You've got multiple levels of data pools from the faculty data pools, PULLS, not POLLS.
We're from Southern Indiana, sorry.
Sorry. I have to remember to enunciate properly. Multiple levels of data pools. Sorry, now I'm tongue twisted. So the faculty can do it, the program administrator can do it, and your Office of Institutional Research can really do it. All right. Let's see. And for the administrator buy-in, it's included with Canvas. All you have to do is really turn it on.
It's free.
It's free.
Lead with that.
All right. My pro tip, actually, I had a pro tip here, and that was one Karri had already said, which is it works well with TaskStream and other software programs like that. All right, another poll everywhere, last poll everywhere. Everybody ready? 37607, best faculty buy-in strategy for your campus. How are we doing on time? All right, a couple more seconds to get your answers in. Then those of you in the room, please chat with your person next to you and talk about your answer. Those on Zoom, either Q&A or chat.
Help each other out. How are you going to convince folks at your place to do this?
And then Jim, maybe you can give us some of the responses from the Zoom people. Sorry. Yeah, that's what I would have said too. All right, how about 30 more seconds for the people in the room? And then Karri's going to tell us what the most popular answers were, and we're going to hear a little bit from the people out in Zoom land, what they have to say.
All right. So almost half of you said, wow, an easy way to do program assessment, looking at those program assessments report. Yes, absolutely. About a third of you said, look at all this great direct evidence of student learning, looking at those faculty annual reports. Yes, I mean, the answer really is all of those things, but I'm so thrilled that you also see value in that. And then the rest was kind of spread between the other three. So again, if you happen to be joining us in Zoom, you have an advantage that those of us in the room do not, which is the static chat feature. So please tell us if you chose other, and it looks like a share of you did. Tell us what that other is, because we want to know about it, because maybe we want to steal that idea, right? Like we would use it where we work too. So share it in the chat. Yeah, I would see a hand.
I would say my other is the amount of money you're gonna save your IR office.
Yes.
Because, good Lord,
So-
the amount of time it takes them to.
The amount of time your IE person spends trying to get all the data every single semester, you've got a huge cost savings.
Yep.
Right.
And time savings too, right?
Yeah,
Because
I
it's
mean, and they're
fast.
not like my friend was our IE. She cooked brownies for people to get them to collect their data. But she could not get it. If you bake it into the course, you don't have a choice.
Yeah, bake it into the course, and then you don't have to bake brownies to get your faculty to do what you're supposed to do.
And now Jim's going to share some of the input from the Zoom people, because we don't want to leave them out.
We had a lot of the comments were B, and then there was one comment which elaborated more, which said D around data with suggestions that data could be used for publishable studies. So,
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Aggregate data is useful, and you don't have to have it run through an IRB if you're using it in aggregate and not identifying people.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. Or, you could parlay it into coming next year to QM conference, and we'll sit in the audience and you can tell us about how you're using this on your campus.
Just an organizational tip. We started this with our institutional level outcomes, so ILOs. And since I'm the administrator, I got to create the first folder, and I made sure I put a date on that. So for 2022, these are our outcomes. And I know that in 3 years or 5 years or whatever our cycle is going to be, there's going to be a new set. And it just occurred to me that, wow, I should have done that at our sub levels also, because we have, we're a tiny school. So, there's only one upper level, but at each of our program levels, which I assigned to our various divisions, each of those should also have the date, a year on them that they were established. So we know that those PLOs, those program level outcomes were established here. And those are the ones that I'm pulling down in my class this year. But 3 years from now, when they change, I'll be able to tell, oh, it's that folder, not that folder.
Yep. And it's same with School of Ed, as we've talked earlier about CAPE standards. So I'll use that reference again. They change. Those change. The standards to which you're aligning to begin with change. And so, yeah, having a naming device that makes it really clear so that your faculty, they're no real error of their own, aren't accidentally pulling in outcomes. You don't want to delete them because you still need that data for the historical data piece. But if you need to update them, yeah, definitely a good naming device. That's a good tip.
Our lovely moderator has informed me we have 5 minutes, so we're in Q&A, which we were already in anyway, but I'll just advance the slides so we all know.
Mind to pass the microphone?
Is there a strategy that you have for looking at the delta between grades and outcome achievement?
Oh, that would be really fun to look at. That's not something that we have done for our use case, but certainly something that could be done if you wanted to pull reports on student grades and then compare that to student outcome performance. Yeah, that's a great way to use that.
Woohoo, you're way above me because I don't know what a delta is. So, oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Because you guys also said there's a lot of people who are new to using outcomes and things like that. I also wanted to share 2 other things from our hard knocks. Is that outcomes is also used with faculty who are using the Learning Mastery Gradebook. And so your use case of outcomes for assessment is different than how faculty are using it with Learning Mastery. And so the new features of the improved learning outcomes, there's 2 that you can turn on. Be careful not to turn them on.
Yeah.
Because they can negatively affect the individuals who you don't even know what they're doing and their scalings, because they're not necessarily all going to be the same scalings.
Yes. Yeah. And I think another thing to that point to keep in mind is, so there are kind of like 2 Learning Mastery Gradebooks, right? There's like the instructor facing one where the instructor sees that dashboard that was included on our screenshot. But there's also one that can go student facing. You could turn on the student Learning Mastery Gradebook and they can see how they're performing on those outcomes. And I think that, yes, you can make an argument of why it might be valuable for students to be getting that feedback in real time. However, in classes where like a capstone course where maybe there are only 4 students, if you have a really small student population in that class, it could be easy for other students to see how their classmates are performing and be able even to like tell maybe who's performing at what level if the class size is too small. So those are some things to keep in mind if you want to turn on some of those features. Just, really think through what are the potential ramifications. In a lecture hall of 100 students, it may not matter if students can see what the class average is. But if you've got a tiny class, suddenly that's really telling about how their classmates are performing.
And another point to that too is in my program, I had some faculty that did turn it on, and then their students, it was like anxiety producing for their students, right? And so as the program leader or as the program administrator, you might want to have send this message out to your students. You might want to have it encapsulated so everybody knows what's going on and why. So I think we have time for one more question, then we're out of time.
So I was just curious about the learning curve for the software, right? So there seems to be some learning that you need to do to be able to really use all the pro tips. Do you have any suggestions on where to go learn that? Like besides spaces like this, if I need more, where do I learn more?
Yeah, I think, depending on how large your institution is, what we found is that as we started using them, we figured out that there was another regional campus that was also using them and had gone like a semester or 2 before us. And so it was a matter of calling that office and saying, hey, can we have lunch, virtual lunch, and sit on Zoom and you talk through to me, what are the things I need to know not to do? Also just spending time in the Canvas forums or, whatever LMS you're using to find out about the nuts and bolts. We mentioned the change in quizzes, and definitely that's something that we're going to have to, if our institution, or more specifically, if Canvas decides that they're going to enforce the switch over to new quizzes, because that's more likely to be what will happen, right? So if Canvas tells us suddenly we have to use these, then we have to revisit any of our assessments that are in the quiz tool. We have to revisit what that looks like.
And here's another thing. We are really interested in your journeys. So I've uploaded our materials to the shared site. It's Samantha, Earle, and Karri, Hamlett-Bedan, and we'd love to hear where you are and what you're doing. So
thank you. Thanks for nerding out about assessment with us.
Yes, it was exciting. We didn't think maybe we'd have anybody come.